So picture this. You're at a high school reunion. You look across the gym, and you see two people born in the exact same year.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Right, and one of them looks remarkably youthful, like just a real-life Paul Rudd, somehow totally untouched by the passage of time.
Like they've been frozen in amber or something.
Exactly. But then the other person looks like they've lived, I don't know, three distinct, completely exhausting lifetimes. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking that very common, very visible observation about how bodies age, and we're pivoting to something you really cannot see in the mirror.
Which is honestly the ultimate puzzle in modern neuroscience right now.
It really is.
Yeah.
We're asking a pretty strange question today. Why does one person's mind age fundamentally faster than another's, even if they share, very similar genetics?
Because we can easily see the biological wear and tear on a face, right? But quantifying that invisible weight, pressing down on our cognitive health, that has been so much harder.
Yeah, totally.
We're basically looking for the hidden forces that dictate why some brains stay incredibly sharp well into their 90s, while others begin to structurally degrade decades earlier.
And scientists have finally mapped out that invisible web of influences. Our mission today is to explore a landmark April 2026 study. It was published in the journal Nature Medicine, and it's titled The Exposome of Brain Aging Across 34 Countries.
And it's a massive piece of research.
Massive. And we're going to extract the absolute most important insights from this research so you can walk away understanding what is actually aging your mind. Okay, let's unpack this. What were we getting wrong about brain aging before this study even came out?
Well, to really appreciate how revolutionary this new map is, we kind of have to look at the traditional medical view of cognitive decline, things like Alzheimer's or dementia.
Right, the classic model.
Yeah. Historically, the medical community viewed healthy brain aging mostly as this two-part equation. First, there was your genetic destiny. Like, did you inherit good genes?
Which you can't really control.
Exactly. And second, there were your individual lifestyle choices.
Which is the classic advice we all hear, right? Like, eat a Mediterranean diet, get plenty of sleep, go for a jog, do your daily crossword puzzles.
Right. Keep the brain active.
It framed brain health completely as an issue of personal responsibility.
It did. But that framework, it always had a massive flaw, because when researchers actually looked at the global data, genetic factors only explained a tiny fraction of the variance in healthy aging.
Wait, really? A tiny fraction?
Yeah, I mean, if genetics and personal lifestyle were the whole story, the numbers should have lined up neatly across the board, but they just didn't.
So what was missing?
Well, a big reason for that blind spot was a really severe sampling bias. Most of those older foundational studies focused almost entirely on single-country cohorts. We're talking predominantly North America and Western Europe.
Oh, I see. Which means we were looking at a highly truncated range of the human experience.
Precisely.
Because if you're only studying, like, middle-class retirees in Boston and London, you're missing the extreme environmental and economic conditions found in rapidly industrializing nations or regions with really high inequality.
It's a huge gap in the data.
It's like trying to understand global ocean temperatures by only measuring the water in a single harbor.
That is a great way to look at it, actually. The Global South was just severely underrepresented in the literature. And because of that, scientists were left with this really confusing reality.
Confusing how?
Well, there are these massive variations in brain aging globally that simply could not be explained by clinical diagnoses or genetics alone.
Huh.
Furthermore, researchers kept noticing that environmental factors sometimes seem to mimic or even aggressively amplify the symptoms of dementia. And it did this in ways that completely broke those classic medical models.
So we were basically looking at the brain like an isolated car engine. And if the engine broke down early, we blamed the factory parts, like the generics, or we blamed the driver-like individual lifestyle choices.
Right, exactly.
But we should have been looking at the weather, the condition of the roads, and the corrosive atmosphere the car was actually driving through.
We were entirely ignoring the terrain.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the core concept of this breakthrough research, the exposome.
The exposome.
Yes, the exposome is the cumulative synergistic environment we live in. It's literally everything outside of your body. The physical environment, the social structures, the economic realities.
Wow, everything.
Everything. All of these external forces interact together, and they physically embed themselves into your biology over the course of your entire life.
So what does this all mean for us? I mean, measuring a specific gene is one thing, but how do scientists even begin to measure something as vast and honestly abstract as the environment and connect it directly to a physical brain scan.
That ambition is exactly what makes this study a landmark. It was this massive international effort spearheaded by neuroscientists from the Latin American Brain Health Institute and the Global Brain Health Institute at UCSF.
Incredible institutions.
Yeah, including researchers like Dr. Agustina Legaz, Sebastian Mogilner, Hernan Hernandez, and Agustin Ibanez. And they didn't just look at one city.
Right, it was global.
They gathered data from 18,701 participants spread across 34 different countries, spanning 6 continents.
That is a staggering amount of data. And they looked at healthy individuals, but didn't they also include people already dealing with cognitive decline?
They did. Patients diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal lobar degeneration, and mild cognitive impairment. It's a truly comprehensive global snapshot.
But the metric they used to measure the aging itself is what's really fascinating. They calculated something called the brain age gap.
Yes, the BAG. The brain age gap is essentially the difference between your chronological age, so the absolute number of years you've been alive, and your biological brain age, which is how old your brain physically appears to be.
Okay, so how do they figure out how old a brain looks?
The scientists took structural MRI scans, which actually measure the physical volume of the brain's gray matter. And they also took functional connectivity scans, like EEG or MEG, which track the electrical chatter between different brain regions.
And then they took all of that complex brain data and basically fed it into an advanced artificial intelligence model, a machine learning tool called LightGBM, right?
Exactly. The AI has looked at enough brains to know exactly what a healthy 50-year-old brain should look like. So it analyzes your specific scan and makes a prediction.
So if you are 50 years old, but the AI looks at the wear and tear on your brain and predicts you're 60, you have a brain age gap of positive 10.
Which means accelerated aging. Your brain looks a full decade older than you actually are.
Ouch.
Yeah. Conversely, a negative number would mean delayed aging. Your brain looks younger than your chronological age. So once they establish this brain age gap for all 18,000 participants, they map those numbers against 73 distinct country-level exposome factors.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The data they uncovered from that mapping is just staggering.
It really is.
When they aggregated the exposome models, meaning they looked at all of these environmental factors working together as a giant web, it explained up to 15.5 times more variance in brain aging than any individual factor acting alone.
The sheer magnitude of that effect completely redefines our understanding of cognitive health.
15.5 times.
I know. The synergistic interaction of your environment is overwhelmingly more powerful than single isolated exposures.
Yeah.
But the most disruptive finding is how this environmental weight actually compares to actual neurological diseases.
Yes, this is the part that completely changes the narrative. The data showed that living with a high exposome burden accounted for a 3.3 to 9.1-fold higher risk of accelerated brain aging.
Which is a huge multiplier.
And that predictive power actually exceeds the effects of having a clinical diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or frontotemporal lobar degeneration.
Let that settle for a moment. The environmental and social weight pressing down on your life is leaving a heavier, more measurable fingerprint on your brain's accelerated aging than the biological disease itself.
That is just wild. We need to break down exactly how this damage happens because the study divides this environmental weight into 2 distinct pathways. I like to think of it as the hardware and the software of the brain.
That's a helpful analogy.
Let's start with the hardware, what the researchers call the physical exposome. I mean, we can intuitively understand that breathing bad air is bad for our lungs, but how does it physically shrink the brain?
Well, the physical exposome includes tangible atmospheric metrics. We're talking about fine particulate matter known as PM2.5, black carbon emissions from diesel engines, even a lack of access to urban green spaces.
Not having a park nearby is part of the physical exposome.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also includes extreme weather patterns, like harsh mean precipitation and non-methane volatile organic compounds.
Which sounds very scientific.
It does. But you'd recognize those in daily life as the harsh fumes off-gassing from, say, fresh paint, cleaning supplies, or industrial exhaust.
Right. And the researchers found that these physical factors literally degrade the brain's hardware. It drives structural aging, physically shrinking the gray matter volume in regions like the limbic system and subcortical areas.
It does.
But the journey from a car's exhaust pipe to literal brain shrinkage is what really blew my mind.
It's all about physical toxicity, and it bypasses a lot of the body's natural defenses.
Yeah.
Let's take a microscopic particle of black carbon from air pollution, for example.
Okay.
It's so incredibly small that when you breathe it in, it doesn't just stay in your lungs. It can actually cross the blood-brain barrier directly.
Yeah.
Or it can travel right up your olfactory nerves, the nerves in your nose responsible for smell, and deposit itself straight into your brain tissue.
Straight into the brain. And the brain doesn't just ignore a foreign particle of soot sitting there.
No, it mounts a defense.
Okay.
It treats it like a severe threat. The presence of these toxins triggers microglial activation. Microglia are essentially the brain's frontline immune cells. When they detect these foreign pollutants, they release inflammatory chemicals to attack the invader.
But you can't really kill a piece of carbon the way you kill a virus, right?
Exactly. You can't. So the immune system just stays in overdrive, and that causes severe oxidative stress and chronic neuroinflammation.
Wow.
Over years and decades, that constant simmering inflammation damages the integrity of your synapses and physically kills off healthy brain tissue.
So simply breathing in polluted air over a lifetime physically rots the hardware of the brain. That is terrifying, but biologically it makes complete sense. We can literally track the particle.
We can't.
Now let's look at the other pathway, the software side, which this study calls the social exposome.
Right. So where the physical exposome breaks down the structural volume of the brain, the social exposome disrupts its functional connectivity.
Meaning how the brain talks to itself.
Exactly. How efficiently different regions of your brain communicate and sync up with each other. The researchers found that adverse social factors were most strongly associated with accelerated functional aging,
Where in the brain, mostly?
particularly in the frontotemporal networks. Those are the areas governing complex thought, emotional regulation, and decision-making.
The factors they measured here, they feel like they belong in a sociology textbook, not a neuroscience lab.
They really do.
Because they looked at socioeconomic inequality, the Gini index, which measures wealth distribution, lower GDP per capita, and baseline poverty levels. But they also measured some deeply systemic political metrics, right?
They did. And it's crucial to frame how they measured this. We need to be clear for the listeners that the researchers weren't approaching this through a political lens, looking to make a judgment or endorse a specific ideology.
Right, they were just looking at the data.
Exactly. They treated social structures, things like the strength of local democracy, civil society participation, the predictability of rule of law, or access to the justice system, as cold, hard biological exposures.
Just empirical data points.
Yes. It was measured with the exact same clinical detachment as measuring lead in a city's water supply.
And they found that lower scores in these areas, meaning, reduced local representation, higher structural inequality, and fragile sociopolitical conditions consistently predicted accelerated functional aging in the brain.
Across the board.
But this is where I need some help connecting the dots. How does a purely social concept like inequality physically alter the electrical chatter in a brain scan?
The bridge between sociology and biology here is a physiological mechanism known as allostatic load.
Allostatic load.
Yes. When you live in an environment with high structural inequality or a lack of basic social welfare, you are placed in a state of chronic, relentless stress. Your brain's alarm system, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, gets activated.
Okay, so let me see if I have this straight. Biologically, my brain doesn't actually know the difference between being chased by a physical predator, like a bear, and the constant underlying anxiety of living in a fragile economy where I might not make rent.
That is exactly the mechanism. To your HPA axis, a failing social safety net or severe economic instability is treated as a constant low-grade predator.
That's fascinating.
Right. I mean, homeostasis is your body's way of keeping things stable, like maintaining your body temperature. Allostasis is your body adapting to an immediate challenge, like your heart rate jumping when you're startled.
Makes sense.
But when the stressor never leaves, when poverty or social instability is your daily reality, that allostatic load just builds up. You're perpetually bathed in stress hormones like cortisol.
And cortisol is toxic to the brain in chronic high doses.
It is highly neurotoxic over long periods. That cumulative stress forces the brain to make compensatory alterations in its functional networks. It has to literally rewire the way the software runs just to deal with the constant external demands and that flood of stress hormones.
Oh, wow.
And over time, those emergency functional changes become permanent, manifesting as accelerated cognitive aging. The software breaks down because it was forced to run in survival mode for decades.
This represents a massive paradigm shift. We can't just tell people to eat better and solve crossword puzzles if they're swimming in a toxic physical and social environment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the scientific community has to adopt what this study calls a neurosyndemic framework.
Neurosyndemic, what does that mean?
Well, a syndemic occurs when two or more distinct afflictions interact synergistically, contributing to an excess burden of disease. So this framework formally recognizes that physical pollution, social instability, and economic adversities,
Hmm.
they don't act alone.
Right.
They weave together and interact directly with your biology to drastically compound your cognitive vulnerability.
It completely reframes how we view brain health. It is no longer just about an individual's failure to maintain a healthy lifestyle. It acknowledges that brain health is a shared responsibility between individuals and the governments or societies they live in.
Exactly.
Because if you don't have access to urban green spaces and you're breathing in PM 2.5 daily and you're operating under chronic, inescapable economic stress, a bowl of blueberries is not going to save your brain's architecture.
It's just not. It demands a shift from reactive medical care, where we simply wait until a patient presents with severe dementia to begin treatment, to proactive structural interventions.
The ripple effects of this research are going to be felt far beyond just the medical field. I mean, urban planning, for instance, becomes a frontline medical intervention.
Oh, absolutely.
Planting more trees and designing accessible green spaces isn't just about making a city more walkable or aesthetically pleasing. It is literal preventative neurology.
Urban planning, environmental regulations to curb black carbon emissions, broad public health policies aimed at strengthening basic wealth whole. They're all brain health initiatives now.
That's such a powerful way to look at it.
And the study also points to a really fascinating future application of technology.
Oh, right, with the AI.
Because these exposome metrics are so powerfully predictive, artificial intelligence and machine learning could eventually use these environmental models to detect at-risk populations globally.
So we could map out cognitive vulnerability on a geographic level long before clinical symptoms ever appear in those communities.
Precisely. It's the ultimate early warning system.
But, hearing all of this, it is easy to feel a little helpless. I mean, if the environment is doing all of this to us and the environment is so much bigger than any one person, are we just doomed by our zip code?
I hear that a lot.
If I live in a highly polluted, highly stressed area, is my brain just fundamentally destined to age faster, regardless of what I do?
This raises an important question, and thankfully the answer points toward hope, not doom.
Oh, good.
Understanding these factors actually provides us with far more targets for intervention than we ever had before. For decades, the assumption was that brain aging was largely a genetic destiny you couldn't escape.
Because you cannot rewrite your DNA.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But we can clean up air pollution. We can regulate volatile organic compounds. We can advocate for stronger social safety nets and predictable justice systems. By proving that the environment is the primary driver of brain aging, this study proves that we have the collective power to protect our brains by changing the environment we build.
That is an incredibly empowering way to look at it. We aren't locked in. We just have to change the terrain.
Exactly.
Let's summarize the key takeaways from this Nature Medicine study for you to keep in your back pocket. First, brain aging is not just the inevitable passage of time or the luck of your genetic draw. It is heavily driven by a massive synergistic web of environmental factors known as the exposome.
Second, this environmental damage operates on two simultaneous tracks. Physical pollution, like fine particulate matter and black carbon, physically breaks down the brain's structural volume, the hardware.
Right.
And at the exact same time, social and economic stress disrupts the brain's functional connectivity, the software, by continually overloading the body's stress response systems.
It really shows us that the boundary between our physical bodies and the outside world is basically just an illusion. We are highly porous. The environment we build around us literally builds the architecture of our brains in return.
It's a profound realization about human biology. We are deeply, inextricably linked to the ecology and the societal structures we exist within. You just cannot separate the health of the individual mind from the health of the community.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought to chew on. We know the exposome accelerates the brain age gap. But what happens if you dramatically change your exposome?
Oh, that's the big question.
Right. If a person migrated from a highly stressful, heavily polluted area to an environment with pristine physical conditions and high social equality, could the brain dynamically heal? Could we actually reverse some of that functional aging once the allostatic load is lifted?
Or is the environmental stamp on our brains, like those two people standing in the gym at the high school reunion, a permanent, unerasable record of everywhere we've been?
Discovering whether that damage is permanent or dynamically reversible, that is the next great frontier for this kind of neuroenvironmental research, and we will certainly be watching those developments closely. Thank you for joining us in the deep dive today. If you enjoyed this exploration into the hidden forces shaping our minds, please follow and subscribe for more deep dives and science stories. Until next time, take care of your environment and it will take care of your brain.